All right, well, 3 o'clock is the time, and that means that we have to get started on our workshop. I want to begin by first introducing myself. I'm Reverend Damien Lake. I am your Associate Conference Minister for the Missouri Mid-South Conference, and I am so glad to be with you this afternoon. As we have already begun CAG, last night we had our opening worship service that was held online, and it was a wonderful service, and we've posted that on YouTube. Our YouTube channel for the Missouri Mid-South Conference has that posted there, and so you'll be able to catch up and watch that if you missed that opportunity last evening to join us for worship. We are recording our workshops, so just putting that out there now so you are aware that this session is being recorded. We record these, and then we're posting these also to our YouTube channel, and then we will send out a link in our daily newsletter that are producing for the conference annual gathering called The View from the Couch. So hopefully you've gotten that first one. And as you can see, Rob and myself and Carol, we're all using our backdrops, our virtual backdrops for Zoom, and you can find those on the MMS website underneath CAG materials. So if you're interested in having something fun, and Meredith, she jumped right in. Look at that. So we all got our good vibes and our pivot going. So we hope that this is a fun opportunity for us to gather virtually. We're trying to make this as interactive as we can. So we're going to encourage you to ask questions as we go along. You can use either the chat box feature if you would like, or you can simply raise your hand in a physical way, or you can also use your hand raising through the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So there's different ways to let us know that you have a question. So I will introduce to you, or I'll let Rob introduce himself to you as our guest today, who I will be interviewing for our session about technology and the church. Rob?
Hi, so my name's Rob Van Ness. I'm the pastor and teacher at Holy Trinity Community Church, United Church of Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. And we are a small church by all practical measures who've had to do a lot of pivoting into technology as a result of the pandemic. And so we're just here to share what we've done, and maybe hopefully that information will help you as well. And I'm looking forward to all your questions.
Great. Thanks, Rob. I'm going to pin you. Add my pin. All right. And that way we can see who's chatting here. So, Rob, you are filled with all of this energy. And you know how I know that? Because every time we get together, it's like it's just pouring out of every part and piece of you. And it is incredibly energizing to be around somebody that has these kind of awesome ideas, that's always kind of brainstorming and coming up with new ways to do ministry. And so I have been fortunate enough throughout this last year to be able to watch a lot of your worship services online. And so I wondered if you could kind of talk a little bit kind of about how you made that transition from, kind of being in person to doing some online worship.
Sure. So, like a lot of other churches, that fateful week in March of 2020, it was Wednesday of that week when we decided that Sunday we would not be meeting in person because of the national shutdown. And so what happened was I used my cell phone and did Facebook Live from my living room. And did that for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then we switched to having our choir person, Charlie Hawks, meet me at church. And we would live stream from church again on my cell phone because we didn't have a camera. We did that for about 3 to 4 weeks. And over that time, started looking at other ways that people were doing church. For us, live streaming was a no-brainer because It's easy to do, and all you need is a cell phone. We didn't have any technology to employ besides my cell phone. But as we looked at other churches doing Zoom worship, and that was great, we decided that we wanted to do something that was a little more polished and a little more inclusive of as many people as possible. And so we sacrificed the ability for everyone to see each other, which is what Zoom worship allows, I would argue, as one of its greatest benefits, or a pre recorded, produced worship service where we create content all week long and we edit it into one worship service, which we then upload onto YouTube and Facebook. And one of the benefits of creating a pre recorded worship service is I can have church members record on their iPhone any part of worship, call to worship, the call to offering, communion, benediction, scripture reading, poems, whatever, and then I can insert them into the service. A pre-recorded service also allows us to use various graphics and images and what we know as overlays, where we put on the screen over what's being played, like this is our sermon, or here is the call and response for this prayer. And the biggest benefit for us with going with a pre-recorded worship service is my music minister is was willing to learn how to use tech, and so he started creating choir videos. If you've ever seen those choir videos where there's like 15 people singing and you can see them all in their own squares, we started making those. And as a result, a year later, I have a library, if you will, of over 60 songs that our choir has done that I can go back to and reuse week after week after week, which has been nice because our choir needed to take a break. And currently, that's what we're doing now. We create content all week long and then produce, edit, and upload a pre recorded worship service.
That's great. So, thinking about that kind of technology, Rob, you mentioned Zoom, which we're using now, obviously, for our conference annual gathering. But you mentioned Zoom as one way, and I know some churches are using that as that kind of personal way to connect with one another. And you mentioned kind of this idea of pre-recording. Can you talk about kind of like some of the pros and the cons to kind of each of those kind of different versions of doing worship?
Sure, absolutely. It's different ways of experiencing community. So, for instance, when you have Zoom worship, you're able to pretty much all see each other at the same time. People like that, have a conversation like an actual coffee hour where you're watching people speak and share and everyone takes turns. Um, but one of the downsides of Zoom is that the audio quality stinks, and videos can often be problematic and don't look or sound their best. Also, it's the execution of Zoom itself. In smaller churches, I understand it's the pastor who's controlling all of the Zoom functions while they're walking through a live service with their churches. And frankly, that can be a lot. So a lot of churches, what they have is like a Zoom moderator who is co-host, who takes care of all of the screens and pinning and chat and all of that so that the pastor can do what they do. And if you do Zoom church, I highly recommend having a moderator as co-host who takes care of all of the tech things so that the pastor can focus on the service itself. Um, One of the benefits of a pre-recorded service is that you are able to use a much better video and sound quality. You're able to use screen overlays. I spoke about them earlier. If you look at this Zoom call right now, your name in your box, my name in my box, is an example of a screen overlay. And that could be anything, words to a song, words to prayer. And I have found when people are watching worship on a screen, they kind of look at it as a music video or as a really good, engaging YouTube. The more you can have on screen going on, the more you're going to keep their attention. The less you have going on screen, the less. So I would argue, especially for replaying worship, because we upload our worship on Facebook and YouTube, and in the moment, my church has 161 members on record. Well, that really means we have 80 active members. And our average worship attendance every week when we met in person was between 60 and 80 members. Well, because we do pre-recorded worship, we reach about 150 to 200 people, counting views of in 2 minutes within a week of our broadcast. And that's because people can come back at their leisure and watch it whenever they want. And because it's a produced, pre recorded worship service, it's much easier for us to package it in a theme, if you will, that is easier for people watching after the fact to digest. Now, like I said earlier, in Zoom, you get the ability to see everybody, and that connection is so crucial in these times. But one of the ways that we connect in a pre recorded worship service is with the chat. If you're watching our YouTube or Facebook pre recorded worship service under the premiere function, which simply means that I uploaded earlier in the week, but I set do not play until Sunday at 11 a.m. And on both Facebook and YouTube, when you set something as a premiere, it will go out to everybody who has liked your page or channel. So that's already a little advertisement for your upcoming service. And I have someone who moderates the chat feature on both of those broadcasts, both on YouTube and Facebook. So they welcome everyone. They post giving info in the chat and pin it during the actual offertory. And they also take notes for me as pastor. So when we're in our time of prayer and people list their prayers in the comments section, they're writing them down along with me so that I don't miss anyone. Because I personally make a list of people in our congregation that I pray for um, each week. And then, of course, we are a music driven congregation. So I guess for us, we've got a pretty active choir and they are well beloved. And it was kind of a no brainer for us to go with the option that offered a better video and audio quality, which was pre recorded over and against a Zoom.
Great. Yeah, one of the comments that was just made while we were talking was just about the idea around the security of Zoom. We know that there's been some Zoom bombings, as we say, and that's the terminology that is used. It basically means somebody, finds the link to your Zoom, and if it is not, if you don't ask for it to be guarded or allow a host to check you in, anybody can join it, right? So that can become problematic as well.
And there are problems with that on Facebook and YouTube as well.
Mm,
I shepherd a local church that is made up of people who have been hurt by other expressions of church in their lives.
mm,
We are very sensitive to how social media and comments and sharing affects us. We are a
mm,
very liberal church in the buckle of the Bible Belt, and we are often a target for people who are mean and, frankly, who can post things that are hurtful. And one of the advantages we initially saw in going with pre recorded as opposed to Zoom, I'm so glad you brought this up, was to avoid the whole Zoom bombing experience. It can be very traumatizing. There are ways that you can deal with it, steps that you can take to not be Zoom bombed. You can require a code upon entry. You can put people in a waiting room for Zoom and then only let people in if you know who they are. but that hinders you then in reaching out to any visitors, right? Um, but we quickly learned that using a pre recorded broadcast on Facebook, YouTube, and other online platforms is not necessarily any safer. It is at risk in different ways. For example, I am a out queer pastor at a church primarily made up of LGBTQIA people. We are often the target of people who don't like that and don't think that the church should be open to LGBTQIA people or that God loves them. And that is the foundation of our message. They will often go into the comment section for one of our worship broadcasts and try to post some pretty hateful, hurtful things. And so we have to have moderators who watch that and delete those posts and block those people as they come up. And it happens about once or twice a month, so it's not a lot for us, thank goodness, but it is something that we need to watch. We need to read the comment threads to all of our posts and um, we have a special setting for the moderators on our Facebook page, which is something that you would do on your church's Facebook page, where you would set alerts to be sent to you anytime somebody commented on your posts. And that way you're not just fishing for new posts, but you know every time somebody comments, and then you can go and look at it and see if it's something harmful, which it usually isn't, but sometimes it is, or it's not, and then you can just leave it alone.
Yeah, that's good. So one of the things that I was thinking about too, Rob, is that for some of our congregations, they're smaller in more rural areas, and so technology might be a bit more challenging in some ways, just getting access to having internet. So if you were going to go on Facebook Live, as an example, and that was going to be your format, that sometimes doing that may be really problematic. Some of our churches, again, don't have any access to internet in some of their areas. So can you talk a little bit kind of about, why you might or how you might work in a situation like that to still get the message out to the people that you're trying to reach and beyond?
Absolutely. I belong to several Facebook groups of pastors talking in dire anguish about how to deal with all of the technology problems. And so we share lots of information. And I can tell you that for live streaming, and live streaming is when you have some device that is recording you doing what you do and in real time putting that onto an online platform, whether Facebook, YouTube, or something else. And in order to do live streaming, you need to have a viable connection to the internet. So whether that's a wireless connection, which is what I use when I am doing live streaming, or if I would need to physically plug into my router to connect to my internet, which our church is this big old brick building. And on one half of the church, I get great wireless Wi Fi access. And on the other half of the church, if I'm doing anything live streaming, I have to get a really long cord to plug directly into my router to guarantee that I have that connection. If you're simply not able to get access to the internet, then live streaming is not going to work for you. But one of the things which you could do to work around that is one, if you're meeting in person, but you still want to offer that hybrid online and in person option, because a lot of our people are not coming back to worship right away when we first open, you can record what you are doing in person and then go home and upload it to the internet and then send that link out to everyone, whether you put that on your Facebook page or your YouTube page or other social platforms. When you do post a service, live stream or pre-recorded, um, you get a link. And that link is very powerful because when we first started doing online worship, it was just enough to get the worship done every Sunday. And then it was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks into doing pre recorded worship. I'm learning how to use an editing program and what overlays are, and it it just takes time, but it's easily learned. It just takes time. Um, I all of a sudden realized, hey, every time I post one of these, once it premieres, I have a link that I can share with everybody. And once I realized that, I just, it just wasn't in my realm of knowing, right? But once I realized that, what we do now is every Sunday night, we send out a link in an e-blast to our entire email list saying, if you missed our service, watch it here. And that has added another 100 views to our worship service. That is one of those little tricks of the trade that I want you to take with you. You can preset emails to go out at a certain time. You could make an email template so it looks the same every week. But we found something as simple as sending the link to direct them to the recording of the online worship greatly increased our views. And that 100 views did not happen overnight. We started sharing our link every Sunday evening to that Sunday's worship service so that they could find it again during the week at their leisure. And over the last 12 months, the community of people who watch our worship after the fact has grown.
Yeah. And to me, Rob, it sounds like, you can also put that link on your Facebook page, right? So that folks could, Sunday night that missed worship, they could easily click there, right? And then find that worship service again and watch it. So that can add to more of your Facebook presence.
We
And
just started
but,
doing that 2 weeks ago.
uh,
And from my point of view, that makes no sense. If you just live broadcast on Facebook, why would posting a link to the service you just broadcast matter? Because they can just scroll down like two or three posts and whoop, there it is, right? But 2 weeks ago, we started posting our link within an hour after our worship service, and we get hits on it like crazy. So
yeah,
post your links
yeah.
everywhere. We've started just last week posting it on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, web page, and in an e-blast. Our
Mhm,
link goes out, and that link is like the golden egg for getting more people to watch your service.
mhm, yeah. So one of the questions in the chat box is coming from Peggy, and she says, "Does anyone use a phone software system to notify members of important changes to your Sunday worship?" Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that language of notification using a phone system. It used to be kind of like an auto system. I think there's some places that are still using it. I also know that there are like some massive ways to text message to people through cell phones. Obviously, not everybody has cell phone or gets good signal. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I will say that we use a digital database. We pay $50 a month for it. It's called
Mhm,
Breeze, church management software. And what Breeze gives us the capability of doing is I can send out an e-blast to our email list, or I can send out a text blast to our texting list, which we keep in our database. When I record a new member, I get, name, address, home phone, cell phone. Do they want to be on our text list or not? So I send out text messages to over 800 people every couple of weeks. I don't abuse texting because while some people like texting, other people don't want to get a lot of text. I find especially a lot of our older members at Holy Trinity do not want a whole bunch of texts, but they still want to get them, right? So to make it simple, I actually reserve texting for big events or when there has been a significant change. Like we were planning an outdoor worship last year in the summer, and we were going to meet at our regular time of 11 o'clock for our first outdoor worship. And then a couple of days prior, I learned that the way that the bells ring at the Catholic Church across the street and the way that they celebrate 3 times on a Sunday, if we meet at 11 o'clock, our praise band would totally drowned out their sacrament of communion. So we decided to be good neighbors and meet at 10 o'clock in order to not create that conflict. So I sent out a massive text message to all of our people letting them know about the change. We have not used a more old school phone system, but we have used a digital database for text messaging.
Great. Thanks for that. Now, I think for a lot of our congregations, Rob, they're starting, if not already, moved back into some kind of in-person worship. Some are worshiping outside. Some are having limited seating, but worshiping partially inside. And I know that some are actually already doing what I'm calling kind of this hybrid model, whereas they have some in person and then some online. I wondered if you might just take some time and talk to us a little bit about that for some of our churches that are thinking about moving from the online back to in person, and kind of maybe even talk a little bit about the significance of keeping an online presence even when we get back to kind of full in-person worship.
Yes, well, I can share with you our story. We just had a town hall meeting yesterday, and then I sent out a massive email. I hate sending out large emails, but sometimes you just have to. And in this meme and in this meeting and this email, we were talking about where do we go from here as the church? Because as far as I'm concerned, every church is a new church plant post pandemic. The world we are in now is completely different than the world we were in before. If you're going to do something new, something crazy, something brave, something bold, now is your time to do it. Like, this is the time, right? And we have been doing several surveys in our congregation. And I'm also in this little pastoral cadre here in Memphis of other smaller and mid sized liberal congregations. And we've been sharing our surveys with each other to see how all of our members are functioning and thinking. All of us have held several similarities in our return to worship. What do you want? How do you want it? When do you want it? All of our congregations basically said 50% of our members are not going to return to worship when we start meeting in person. They are going to wait a little while longer until there is a more acceptable risk profile in gathering indoors in that way. 50% of our churches have also said, as soon as you open those doors, we're there. So what that told us was that we need to be cognizant being able to offer what many are calling hybrid worship, which is a way of saying having both online and in-person opportunities. And it would be a lot of work to continue to produce a pre-recorded worship to post online every week and create and execute an in-person worship. So while we are pre-recording and uploading worship services currently, when we meet in person again, which by the way, for us, we're going to wait until the local population is 50% vaccinated before we start worshiping. The UCC came out with a little blurb maybe a month ago that Ginny shared widely, that the national setting said that in conversations with the CDC, there was a range of recommendation for opening up, that the total local population be somewhere between 50 and 85% vaccinated. Our church council decided to go with 50 and let people choose their own acceptable risk level. So when we do go back to worship, we will stop pre-recording Sunday services and we will start live streaming Sunday service. And in my case, our church does have reliable wireless internet, and we have cameras, the brand of which is called Mevo, Mevo. If you are looking for the simplest way to live stream without using your pastor's cell phone, the Mevo camera is working for us. It's about $350, $400. It stands on a tripod. You got to plug it in to charge it up. But once it's charged, you download the Mevo app onto any device. and you can turn that camera on, turn that camera off. Put your live streams on as many platforms as you want, turn them off. You can even do close up and far away shots from any flat screen you may have. So we're going to use two different Mevo cameras, and we're going to switch back and forth, one for close-ups, one for far away, so that we can share what we're doing in person online in a way that's a little more polished than taking a cell phone and putting it on a tripod in the back corner and just broadcasting that live shot with poor sound. In a pinch, it works, but when you want to level up, that's how we're going to level up with a online app and two Mevo cameras. Coincidentally, if you have internet access, but your wireless is just terrible, you can hardwire with cables the Mevo cameras to your device and into your router so that you can have reliable internet access. Um, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue online worship pre-recorded. Probably, I would imagine, because Shelby County, where Memphis sits, is way behind the national average. So we're just at 14% vaccinated, and we're waiting for 50. So we're hoping by this summer, probably later summer, that we can meet in person. And when we do, we'll go to a hybrid worship service using the Mevo cameras and the Mevo app. And we will broadcast simultaneously live streamed onto Facebook and YouTube. After that broadcast, we will share the link to our YouTube channel in that email and on all of our social media platforms. Something to be said about meeting in person. Obviously, every church has their own comfort level. Our sanctuary is small compared to the size of our congregation. We can seat 125 people in our sanctuary, max. So when we socially distance by household, we've determined we can only fit between 35 and 45 people. We will require masking. We have chosen to not take temperatures because, in my opinion, if you read the data, the temperature can be indicative of having COVID, but it really doesn't tell you whether you're at risk or not. So we're not going to buy those things. We're not going to do that. We have chosen not to require people to be vaccinated because, frankly, there's a whole community of people out there who, for various health reasons, are not able to get vaccinated anytime in the foreseeable future. And there are people out there who may never be able to take the vaccine. So we're letting our people assess their own risk. We will do ticketed worship where we will have no more than 45 people in a Sunday service. And our deal goes like this. If you want to come Sunday and we can't get you in Sunday, we will guarantee you a ticket for the next Sunday. And that also allows us like 5 extra spots for visitors and guests who may stop by. When we first meet, there will be no singing. Singing is a terrible way to um, keep people safe because it spreads around the room so quickly. But we've also read studies that said that increasing airflow is the best way to decrease transmission in closed spaces. And our congregation is in a unique position. We just ordered all new windows for the sanctuary so that we can have operating windows that open and close so we can have wonderful airflow when we do begin to meet in person. The reason we were able to do this is because 2 years ago, before the pandemic started, we were in the process of selling our land and building, frankly, for an obscene amount of money, but it made it worth it. And then that deal fell through as a result of the pandemic 2 weeks before we were supposed to close. Like a lot of 100-year-old church buildings, we had beautiful stained glass windows, and we had found nobody who wanted our stained glass windows. Well, we didn't want the wrecking ball to destroy these beautiful stained glass windows. So we actually had church members come take our stained glass windows apart piece by piece to donate to people who work with stained glass so that at the very least they would not be wasted. So as a result, we've got a bunch of empty windows in our church, but it's proven fortuitous to us to replace those 4 foot by 8 foot tall windows with some single hung windows so that we can open up all of the windows and tell people to dress in layers. If it's cold, you're going to be cold. If you're hot, you're going to be hot. But at least we know we're doing everything we can do to increase the airflow. And for us, because we're a smaller sanctuary, we only have 7 windows. That was literally like $3,900 at Window World, and we were done.
Great. So I think one of the things, and this is one of the questions as well, is in regards to what do you do when you have congregants that are unable to have access to the internet or technology in their homes? I think, that's one of those pieces where when you talk about, kind of recording services, like you can record on Zoom, like we've done, and load that up into the cloud, or you can do something else with it. What do you find in your church as the best way to reach out to those folks?
We've really struggled with being able to reach people who are simply not open to technology. In our particular case, it's not that people don't have access to it, it's just that they don't want to do it. I have the oldest member of my church turns 89 years old tomorrow. And Hollis is not going to go online. He's not going to get an email address. He's not going to Skype. He's not going to Zoom. He's not going to go on Facebook. It's just not going to happen. Well, we've been doing this long enough that I know who those people are as members of our church who simply will not engage technology in any way. And over the past year, what I've learned, what matters is a phone call. So I have a team of myself and 3 other church members, and we have like 10 people who fall into this category. And the 4 of us physically call them once a week, each on our own, to have a conversation, check in with them, talk about worship, answer any questions they have, and listen to them and their lives and their struggles. And for those people who are simply will not engage in technology, that's what's going to happen. Many of us here may be aware of the grants that the Missouri Mid-South Conference was giving to our local churches for technology. Well, at the time that we got our $500 grant, we weren't ready to buy a camera and cables and all that hoo-ha. I mean, I need to find somebody to figure that out, right? I'm not that guy. So what we did is we took that $500 and we offered to buy people who did not have connection devices to the internet a Kindle for like $70. And on that Kindle, they were responsible for getting their own internet. But on that Kindle, we could then set it up so that they could connect with us online. And we had 8 members of our congregation who, in our case, all happened to be elderly and all living in assisted living or senior adult housing. So that means they had internet access without paying for it. They just didn't have a device. And so, because of that grant, thank you, Missouri Mid South Conference and Ginny Brown Daniel, we were able to buy 8 members Kindles, and they now use those to sign on. And it was so popular that we had church members come forward and say, after that grant money is gone, if any older person wants a Kindle so that they can log in, I will buy them one. You just tell me, and I'll give you the so that is 1 or 2 ways that we have reached out to people trying to deal with the technology barrier. And in my experience, it was the division between those who are just not going to engage using technology. It happens. But the work of the church must go on. So in our case, it's like a phone tree. Hollis gets 4 calls every week, one from me, one from Donna, one from Lee, and one from Karen. And everybody on our list does. And that's the best thing we could do, I would argue. Then there were other people who were in the case of, I don't have a way to connect to technology, but if I did and it was really easy, I might do it. And that's where our Kindle program came into play.
Great. Another question that comes from our audience today is, what information are you using for the number of people attending? And do you use the people reached or the engagement number?
I use the engagement tools off of Facebook and YouTube. Um, with your YouTube page or your Facebook page, you get access to these various data analysis tools. I don't even know what they call them. But like on Facebook, you can click on the bottom of your pre-recorded worship service after it has posted, where it says how many people saw it. You can click on that and it'll give you a simple breakdown. And then if you go into the Facebook business suite, you can get even more detailed reports. On YouTube, there is no quickie looky loo. You need to go to your admin page of your YouTube account and click on the analytics, and it'll give you the full spread of what they track and what it means. And that's what I use in large part to gauge attendance.
Great. And so, yet another question is wondering, can you address what it takes besides a streaming license to play copyrighted music on platforms like Facebook Live or YouTube?
Yeah, oh my
And
God, that's just so crazy.
sometimes
Uh,
it's frustrating, right? Because they take
it
it
is
down and you don't even get a chance to show it.
We used the UCC service from the national setting for the week after Easter. So I could take a break, because we had like 9 online Holy Week services and events. And it was great, but it was a lot. And one of the songs they put in that bundle for that pre-packaged, pre-recorded UCC worship service for the Sunday after was flagged no matter where I put it. So as long as that song was in my pre-recorded service, it would play hunky dory. And when it got to that song, the volume would just go off. And the trick was, it didn't tell me which product from the UCC was being flagged. I had to hunt and pick for it and repost and find it. Well, I knew it was a song, and they only offered 3 songs. So it didn't take long, but it was the song that they said was owned by the UCC and given with permission from the hymnal, from the UCC hymnal. That's the one that was flagged on Facebook and YouTube in the Memphis market anyway. When you look at analytics on the admin pages for YouTube or Facebook, if there is a copyright issue, they'll tell you, right? Now, Facebook will just shut you down. And sometimes they'll shut you down and sometimes they won't. And you don't know until it happens. On the YouTube administrative page, it'll tell you if there is a copyright infringement potential. And here's the thing, we do a lot of praise music at Holy Trinity. And so we use a CCLI license for all of this praise music. And we make sure that the songs we use are covered under that license. CCLI has a website, as do all of these online licensing products, by which you can check and see what you can and cannot use under that license. We also have a one license, which covers most of our hymns and traditional church music. YouTube, when we use any music whatsoever, will flag it and say there is a possible infringement of copyright on this post. And again, there is no one to talk to and say, why is it there? But we've never been blocked. And the only reason why I can think that is because we post in the description our licensing numbers for CCLI and one license. And we don't always post one license because we don't always have one license restricted songs in our worship. But what we do, we use it. And for us, we primarily lean on our CCLI license. Incidentally, CCLI offers a CCVI, which is a video license. And we use various video clips on occasion in our worship from like movies or commercials or whatever. And the way around that is you pay for the video license, and then on the video licensing website, they have all of the clips that you can use. It's like a free library of video clips you can use in live and pre-recorded worship. And it's fun. I mean, they've got clips from all sorts of movies in it. I used a clip from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids like 2 months ago, and it was adorable. And it was just this little, maybe 1 minute long clip. But because of our CCLI and CCVI licensing, we could use it. Now, when I used that clip, it was flagged in YouTube as a possible, but they didn't block us. And there's no way to talk to anybody immediately on YouTube or Facebook to resolve these issues. They'll flag it to cover their butts and then do what they want. But because we do intentionally purchase 3 different licensing products, CCLI for our praise music, CCVI for our videos, and 1 license for everything else churchy. So far, we've been covered.
Great. Now, earlier you were talking a little bit about, kind of this idea that whatever happens, when we get back into, church and hybrid mode, that we are essentially entering into a new church start. And one of the things that I know that we have is we have a lot of younger people that are watching our content online. Now, I think that we also know that a younger generation is not necessarily as keen, to use an older term, on our worship services and the way that they are in some ways kind of traditional. And we also know that their attention span is much shorter. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of like the idea of doing a different service that appeals towards that younger kind of demographic, if you will.
Absolutely. When we first went online and I started live streaming from my living room, and then when we transitioned to live stream from the sanctuary, and then transitioned into doing pre-recorded worship, we kept our same order of service. In my mind, I thought, I need to keep something the same because so much is changing, right? This is an act of care. Well, let me tell you something. Our 90-minute worship service went over like a lead balloon online. It was just too long. It was just too much. We needed to cut things down. And it was hard, right? Because as a person who loves liturgy and church, every part is important and precious. How can we take anything out? We needed to slice and dice, and that's what we've done. So here's how we have done that. Our service would usually begin with a prelude, a greeting, and then a 3-song praise set that would go on for about 15-20 minutes. Our services now begin with a prelude, a 1-minute welcome, and 1 3-minute praise song. We then invite everyone to join us later in the service for communion. That's about 2 minutes. We then have a scripture reading, which falls anywhere between 2 and 3 minutes. And where I used to entertain longer scripture readings because I wanted the whole story and the whole context, I don't do that anymore. I keep my readings short and brief. I then go to my sermon. And my sermon previously, I'm a talker, you may have noticed. My sermons, I would say, went 20 minutes long, but I never preached less than 30 minutes pre-pandemic because I'd just go on and on and on. And, it was okay, but that's just way too long. So now my sermons, I really push myself to be between 10 and 20, or I'm sorry, 10 and 15 minutes, 15 minutes at the most. If I can't say it in 15 minutes, it doesn't need to be said, and especially online, because many of you in this call may be having the experience that many of our church members have when they watch things online. When you're watching something online, most of the time you're not just watching something online. You're checking your cell phone, you're looking at your dog, you're talking to your spouse, you're playing with your kids, whatever. I know people who work out while they're watching worship, right? So everyone's multitasking. So making everything shorter matters. The last thing I made shorter, which in my mind was the best thing I ever did, is I held out forever on doing a shorter communion liturgy. I thought communion needed to have all the traditional parts to it, or it wasn't going to count, right? Like, I mean, I was intimately in love with every word, verb, and phrase of a traditional Roman church inspired communion. But nobody watched. Everybody tuned out. Even if their screen was still on, recording their watching, they'd check out and go do something else. So our communion liturgy, which used to be 15 minutes long in person pre-pandemic, now touches at just about 5 minutes. And I use graphics and I use overlays, and that includes distribution and the source and corda and all that good stuff. Because then I could engage people. People missed communion, but they just couldn't sit there and watch me do for 20 minutes what I did in person online and stay engaged. And so all of this to say that we usually have more music and prayer than we do preaching or talking in our worship, and they like it like that. Even communion, when I'm going through blessing and consecrating the elements in all of our various homes, I have a background track softly playing of music to kind of create a little ambiance. That's helped a lot. And we keep our worship at about 45 minutes, no more than an hour. And in reflecting on how this affects what we're going to do when we return to in-person worship, I am very fortunate. I have a small handful of people. I have 3 people who help me with the tech and the editing and the uploading and all that stuff. And I would need that. If I just did it all on my own, I would lose my mind. Just producing one Sunday worship service, I did it all on my own for the first 9 months. It was terrible. If any of your pastors are doing all of it just to get an online service done, you need to go and save them. They're losing their minds. But as we go into in-person worship and we have that desire to do a hybrid worship, what we're going to do to keep the benefits of the style of online only worship is we have decided to produce a 30-minute Wednesday evening service that will continue to be pre-recorded so we can benefit from all of the advantages of being shorter, right? More brief, easier to myself since I'm talking about editing. Basically, we're going to do this Wednesday night service, 30 minutes, pre-recorded, so that we can still benefit from being able to offer something that's brief, right-sized for the flat screen medium, and something that includes as many different people as possible.
Great. So the question, and maybe you kind of answered it, but it says, is the Wednesday service totally different from the Sunday worship as far as scripture and sermon, or is it basically what you're talking about, like maybe a smaller, more condensed version?
It's going to be totally different. One of the things which our church has done that has been more successful than any other outreach in the pandemic is I do a 5-minute meditation 3 times a week, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. And I record them ahead of time, but I don't have time to spend hours and hours creating content for these 5-minute meditations. So I look at what I'm doing that day. I look at what's on my list. I quickly compose something I can talk about, and I talk for 5 minutes about gratitude or joy or grieving or Sunday or whatever. And so it's going to be like that. It's going to be less formal. It's going to be less churchy. It's going to be more for us. We're going to play around with having more of an acoustic style, intimate space. I'm going to be wearing plain clothes. I'll talk for 5 minutes on a brief scripture. Each 30-minute worship experience, as we think of it, is going to have a theme where everything talks to each other, from the songs we choose and their lyrics, to the scripture, to my prayer, to our 5-minute meditation, all of that in there. And we won't be celebrating communion in this Wednesday night service either.
Yeah, and I think that alludes to the idea that different demographics are attracted to different things. So, I know, as an example, in our house, I still have a teenage daughter here, and so YouTube is a big part of her programming. If I said the word cable television, she would look at me like she wouldn't have any clue as to what that is, because YouTube is her format. I know for myself, I have been drawn into TikTok world. And for those of you who don't know what that is, good luck. We can have a conversation about that in person. But I found that's another format that is engaging in its quick video. TikTok specifically is maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15, and then you roll on to the next thing. And you know me, I'm a car guy, so that's what my TikTok feed looks like. But I'm wondering, kind of, have you thought about that in the ways that you're doing ministry there? Have you thought about how that plays out for you all?
Absolutely. We've looked at putting videos on Instagram, but they can only be 30 seconds long. And then, of course, there is TikTok. So one of our goals is to get one member of our team to add on to their duties, posting to a church TikTok account, so they'd have access to the pre-recorded worship service, and take that 10 or 15 seconds of prayer or my sermon, or sometimes I tell jokes or whatever, and just find that cool looking little 15-second edit and just throw it up there. And if you want more information, you can click on our TikTok and learn about us. But that definitely for us falls under I personally don't have time to do that, but that is something that we're hoping to look for in the future. But it takes somebody who has access to all of your content to take the time to actually do that. And that leads me into something that I really wanted to say, and that is, content creation is my life right now. And for all of us churches, I think we need to be focused on content creation, on creating libraries of content that we not only use once, but save in some way so that we can reuse again and again. Any good advertising campaign these days isn't a 30-second ad during days of our lives, right? It is content that they put on multiple platforms, whether it's on TV, it's online, it's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's TikTok, it's in the YouTube video, it's an ad before the actual YouTube video, it's on Facebook where you're trying to get a meme advertising your thing to go viral and get shared by lots of people. So you're trying to be cute or trite or funny or whatever. Churches need to learn how to create content. Some of the most valuable tools I have at my disposal now are, one, the song library that my choir has been creating of recordings of them singing songs. I could alternate 3 songs a week for the next 20 weeks and not repeat a song. That gives me a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility. It's not everything. I had somebody ask me for a specific hymn last week, and wouldn't you know, that was one of the ones that we haven't done yet. So we don't have it. But creating content like that, I save old sermons, I save the weekly prayers, I even save the scripture readings. Now I got like a little cube with like a lot of storage data in it so that I could save it. Because if you do a lot of online and pre-recorded work, you quickly learn that the average device, laptop, computer, simply can't store it all. If you just try to store everything on the device you're using for your day-to-day work, you're going to crash pretty quickly when you run out of memory. And that's just a pain in the butt that everyone's got to deal with.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. And that's true. For anybody that's looking to store, you have so many different ways to store. And I highly suggest do not use your laptop or your desktop computer to store videos or to store any kind of real deep content, because it will absorb every ounce of your hard drive like that. So it's best if you can try to use an iCloud or use Google Drive. And of course, you have to pay for the more you store, but it is worth having the content and having it available at your fingertips. So I want to just make sure we're honoring our time. We've been together for about an hour here, but I want to see if there's any questions. We've been answering some of those in the chat. If you have a question that you'd like to ask Rob, please unmute yourself, and we'll take a few minutes to do that with Rob, and then we're going to let Rob go and get back to his content creating. I'm going to take us off of pin view. Anybody feel free to ask questions. Yes, Peggy.
Okay. If you video something in your own church, you do not need a license for that one? You don't use the CC-BY? If it's, is the video only something that's at store-bought or sold by the wonderful world out there?
Yes and no. It is, we do not need a license if there is no music or video in that recording. So if I'm recording people at church, and let's say we're not going to sing in our worship when we first open back up because we don't think it's safe, but we're going to play choir videos on these screens we have hanging up in our sanctuary. So we'll still have music, they just won't be singing in person, right? If I broadcast us watching those screens, it needs to fall under one of our licenses. So it's not just if we're directly streaming something, but if we're recording something that includes copyrighted content, in this case, music or videos, it falls under our license. If we don't have videos or music that is copyrighted in our service, for instance, when the shutdown first happened, a lot of publishing companies out there created a period of time, like 3 to 6 months, where they said, you can use anything out of our catalog without a license, just to help you get through it. These were mostly traditional hymns in the UCC, Disciples of Christ, PCUSA, ELCA, denominations like that. The Catholics didn't do it. The United Methodists did not do it, but whatever. So in that case, you could, but they all expired. And when they expired, then you had to get a license in order to legally replay that content. Yes.
Okay, last night, the liturgical dancing was done at Christ the King. Now, how did that play into one of these licenses? Or
well, legally, Christ the King has a license to use that song. I happen to know that, but so it's covered there. And then the rules are different on different platforms. In a live Zoom meeting, there is not the technology for them to monitor the copyrights as closely as they can in uploaded and pre-recorded video services. So even if they didn't have a copyright license, they're not as likely to get blocked or silenced on a Zoom as they would on Facebook or YouTube. But in our case, the license Christ the King has reasonably meets the requirement for that particular song.
And Rob, so quote another question from the chat box. One congregation says they're using Zoom, but they lose sound 4 to 5 times each service, fading away, coming back. Tech crews trying to figure it out. Any ideas on how they might be able to address that issue?
Yeah, audio is the weakest part of Zoom. It just is. Every platform has its upside and its downside. Audio on Zoom is definitely a downside. From the little bit that I know, what I can say is I've heard, and I have no idea if this is true or not, but in other blogs and stuff, I've heard people ponder if perhaps the host and the co-host, if they have a poor internet connection, if that affects the rest of the call. But I have no idea. So I guess the only tip I would have is check to see if your host and or co-host have a good internet connection. But I have no idea if that's if that's valid or not.
Rob, this
Thanks,
is
Rob.
Judy. And I apologize. I've had 6 phone calls during this session and I've had to leave. Are you saying that, for example, right now, while I am on Zoom with you, I can't start singing, something that Bach wrote just spontaneously without violating some copyright? What about the fair use doctrine in worship?
There is a layered answer to that. First of all, Bach is not copyrighted, so
Right.
we can do all the Bach we want. If you go into Chopin or Tchaikovsky, you might get into a little issue there. I'm kind of a classical music geek. But that being said, technically, anytime someone owns the rights to a piece of music, you need to be able to pay for that. And it is through various licensing platforms and products that you pay to use that. There is intellectual property out there that is restricted. The most well-known version of that is a poem that is beloved by many called The Dash. It's a funeral poem that talks about the dash between when you were born and when you die. And it is a beautiful poem. People love that poem. But the person who wrote that poem does not want anyone to ever use that poem. Their point of view is that they did it for their parent and they don't want anyone else using it. And they have lawyers. And if a church publishes the dash on their Facebook or their web page or in a printed program and somebody rats on them, they'll send you a letter. And if you refuse to stop using it, they will take you to court and get a judgment that's a minimum of $5,000. So copyright issues, while not always enforced, are important and they are real. Just from a justice aspect of it, we want to make sure that we're paying the people who created the intellectual property that we enjoy, right? Nothing is free in this world except for God's grace. So it really depends upon what it is, where it's from, how you use it. You need to know the source information for all of the intellectual property, all of the songs and music you are using in order to responsibly navigate this.
Yeah. Okay, I have to look into it a lot more. I'm a lawyer, and I did have to do research on intellectual property, but many years ago when I was practicing law. And so I'm very concerned about First Amendment issues and also about the fair use doctrine. And I wonder if sometimes we aren't just being scared half to death.
Well, it depends upon what it is. Like there's plenty of online resources where you can go online to the One License or the CCLI database, and you can see all of the songs they've licensed.
Yeah.
Right. And the reality is there's the moral issue of paying people for the work that they've done, as I see it. There's the practical issue of just trying to stay legal, whatever that is. And then there's the practical aspect of it. The practical aspect of it is most churches likely, nobody likes to say this, but most churches likely won't get busted for violating somebody's copyrights. But that doesn't mean that it's legal, and it doesn't mean it's morally justified.
Interesting.
And just to make it clear too, Rob, is that when you are doing, one license as an example, you are required to report in the amount of times that you use that as well. And so it's a bit about reporting it to those licensing services that you have. CCLI does the same thing as far as asking you to make sure that you share with them what you've used. And again, that's about getting payment to those folks that that provided that music to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I want to just say thank you for your attendance today. I know we could probably go on for a while yet because I have a lot more things that I'd love to talk to Rob about in regards to all of this great stuff we're doing. And I'm sure you do too. But we have other events happening at CAG. In fact, at 4:30 this afternoon, our young adults are having a gathering here on Zoom. So we are giving up our space so they can have their space. But we want to thank you, Rob, for all of your engagement with my crazy questions and opportunities to ask you all those questions. But don't forget, we have tonight we have a gathering with me, your ACM. That's happening at 6 o'clock. I am notorious for plugging my own events, but that will happen from 6 until 7:30, 8 o'clock, whatever it takes. I might crack open a beer and share with you a little bit more about myself, as I'm going to be asked questions from one of our distinctive guests that will be joining us tonight. And then tomorrow we have plenty more events that are happening. Rob is going to be doing another prayer space from 9 until about 9:30 or so. We have a retiring well workshop that's being put on by our pension boards from 11 until 12. We also have a pivoting in ministry workshop happening tomorrow from 2 until 3. And then we'll do a budget chat, which is certainly exciting, from 4 until 5. I know lots of people want to know about what's going on with the budget in the Missouri Mid-South Conference. And so we'll talk about that tomorrow. But tonight I invite you to come back, have a drink with me, and let's have some fun and have some conversation. So thank you all for your attendance, and we will see you again soon.
Damien, do you know
Yes.
any more about the finance meeting this morning that was canceled?
Yeah, I do. All I know is that our guest that was lined up was not able to attend, unfortunately, Rita. So we weren't able to get a reschedule on that.
Okay.
That's all I have, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Damien.
You bet.
I hope I helped. Bye.
Hi, Margaret. Are you coming to join us for the young adult gathering? Oh, you're on mute.
No, I was hoping I could
Oh.
still get into that 3 o'clock meeting. I had another
Oh,
appointment.
the
Is anything
the
being,
technology one.
is